Tutankhamun's spectacular treasures. Now, for the first time since they were discovered, all 5,398 objects are being brought together in a new $1 billion museum. This will be the first time many of them have been seen for a century.
Look at the horse, look at the horse, look at the horse.
Scientists have been using the latest imaging and forensic technology to unlock long-buried mysteries, to reveal the man behind the mask.
So many tiny details are visible again.
Now, some of Tutankhamun's most personal items suggest a pharaoh who was racked by illness, and mysterious remains buried alongside him expose the dark secrets of his royal family tree.
He had a child with his own sister.
Together, they suggest Tutankhamun and his family were destined to die out. What was left behind are the magnificent treasures of a spectacular legacy. Tutankhamun was the last pharaoh of his royal family line. He died at age 19, leaving no heirs. And within decades, Tutankhamun's dynasty collapsed and disappeared from history. Ancient Egyptian records ceased to even mention the boy king. Tutankhamun, his father, and his successor were erased from official history. But experts have questioned how the most famous king of ancient Egypt and his whole family could have disappeared without a trace. Now, the most comprehensive forensic examinations of Tutankhamun's treasures are helping unravel the mystery. And it's the most personal items, many never seen before, that have shed remarkable new light on Tutankhamun's short, troubled life. Custom-made shoes, unlike any others from ancient Egypt. A hoard of walking sticks, hidden for decades in the basement of the Cairo Museum. And the most unexpected and unsettling discovery in the pharaoh's tomb: 2 tiny human mummies that were buried with him. The evidence produced by these finds reveal a life racked with pain and tragic personal loss, a complex and disturbing family tree, and political battles that sentenced the young pharaoh to 3,000 years of oblivion. Gathered from museums across Egypt, all of Tutankhamun's items are now on their way to be reunited at the new Grand Egyptian Museum for the first time since Howard Carter opened the young pharaoh's tomb in 1922. More than 5,000 objects were discovered, but only a few have been on display. Until now. Egyptologist Chris Naunton is one of the first people to witness some of the objects that have been hidden in the vaults of the Old Cairo Museum for nearly a century.
A lot of these things are going to be seen for the first time here in the Grand Egyptian Museum, but before they can go on display here, they are all being looked at, assessed for their state of conservation, and where work is required, that work is happening here.
For scientists, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to analyze all the objects up close before the new museum opens to the public. Among the thousands of artifacts, there was one discovery that disturbed Carter more than any other. He recorded it in his journals, now kept at the Griffith Institute in Oxford, England.
This section of the published report deals with perhaps the most poignant objects that Carter came across in the tomb. Inside the treasury, he found the evidence that Tutankhamun had not been buried alone.
Piled among gilded shrines and treasure chests, in a plain and undecorated box, lay 2 miniature sarcophagi. Inside these coffins, were two tiny mummified skeletons.
It's quite clear that this had quite an effect on Carter himself, and that's evident from what he wrote about them. He says, "These pathetic remains give much food for thought. With little doubt, they were the offspring of Tutankhamun, although there is nothing to tell us emphatically."
To Carter, they were a mystery neither he nor technology could answer at the time. Now Egyptologists are using forensic science and DNA analysis to reveal the true story of the child mummies. Among them is Manar El-Kia, a conservator at the new Grand Egyptian Museum. It's the first time she's seen the tiny coffins the mummies were buried in.
Among many other things have been discovered in this tomb, these are particularly interesting because they look very beautiful and well preserved. It's also the first time for me to see coffins for baby mummies.
But the skeletons of the babies found in these coffins weren't fully developed. They were two premature, stillborn girls. But who were they? And why were they buried in Tutankhamun's tomb? It took 21st century DNA technology to provide an answer to this 3,000-year-old mystery. Thousands of miles away from Egypt's sand and dust, in the mountains of Bolzano, Italy, at the Urach Institute for Mummy Studies, biological anthropologist Albert Zink spent a decade perfecting scientific tools to study ancient remains. His research included the first ever DNA study of 11 mummies of Tutankhamun's royal dynasty, found in the Valley of the King's Tombs. And it was the two stillborn babies that were the most intriguing.
It was a big mystery, and nobody really knew whether these two children were his own or whether they were put in as a kind of offering for his afterlife.
Dr. Zink set out to recreate Tutankhamun's genetic map and determine his relationship to these mummies. But it was a task with some serious challenges.
It's a quite complicated and complex process because the DNA, the genetic information in a human body, it degrades after somebody dies. And it degrades quite quickly. It depends for sure on the temperature, on the humidity, on the environment.
Zink finally managed to extract enough precious DNA from these stillborn fetuses to compare it with the DNA of Tutankhamun. The results suggested these babies could have been the future of Tutankhamun's dynasty.
The few markers we had, they showed some similarity to the markers in King Tutankhamun. So it's still likely that they are related to him, that these two fetuses are his own children.
Zink's results suggest that Tutankhamun, the most powerful man in Egypt, could have been a grieving father. But now for the conservators of the Grand Egyptian Museum, another tragedy is unfolding. The babies could soon be lost forever. It's now believed that having lost his only two children, Tutankhamun was buried with their mummified remains in his tomb, to be reunited with them in the afterlife. After Howard Carter discovered them in 1922, he stored the fetuses in a local hospital, where they remained hidden in a drawer for almost 100 years. But atmospheric conditions have taken their toll on these tiny bodies. Now the two stillborn baby girls are in an extremely fragile state.
It's too bad. It's too bad. Their condition is poor, and they may have been invaded by insects.
After so long hidden away, they need urgent help. Otherwise, they could turn to dust.
It's very important to preserve all our cultural heritage, but for these fetuses, it's very important to preserve them because they consist of organic materials. The organic materials are very sensitive to environmental changes, and they can be invaded by living organisms that can eat these organic materials and finish them all.
The challenge for the conservators is to stop the decay before it's too late.
Their condition is getting worse every day. This is really bad. It's very, very sad for me.
For the director of the Grand Egyptian Museum, Tarek Taufik, the next stage will be crucial.
We need now to see how we will deal with this decay, how we can move these very fragile fetuses in order not to lose any of the archaeological substance. So it's a very sensitive operation.
Tutankhamun suffered the private tragedy of losing 2 children before they were born. But it wasn't the pharaoh's only misfortune. At the new Grand Egyptian Museum outside Cairo, the health of Tutankhamun more than 3,000 years ago is taking center stage.
Oh, nice.
Number 279.
Perfect.
Yes,
Egyptologists Salima Ikram and Andre Veltmeyer are now in the fortified storerooms to examine some of Tutankhamun's 130 walking sticks found in the tomb. Many of these haven't been seen for a century.
This one is more fancy. This is a bit more gold.
These everyday belongings of Tutankhamun give a rare glimpse into how he actually lived.
So do the top. They really are one little sort of window into understanding what this man was all about.
Salima and Andre are looking for signs of wear to better understand if and how these sticks were used.
Because these sticks have been conserved, it's sometimes a bit difficult to tell exactly how they have been used because sort of traces of sweat or person's oils have been obscured by the conservation process that Carter used.
Despite some lost clues, there's still evidence of wear and tear that could suggest the young king used the sticks a lot.
On the base, you can often see in the tip whether things were used or not. And maybe some of these tips have been replaced even during the course of Tutankhamun's life. Sometimes the tips of these ones have sort of worn off, but you can see that there are a variety of ends used, and maybe some of the ends also tell us about the function. So maybe some were designed for in the palace, and some were designed for in the temple, and others were designed for walking through sand, which would in fact require a far more sturdy stick because you depend upon it more, even if you are completely able-bodied.
With signs of wear, could these sticks be evidence that Tutankhamun was an infirm king? Other items from the tomb seem to hint at a king who was not as mobile as a healthy teenager should be. An inlaid storage box from Tutankhamun's treasure trove, one of the finest examples of ancient craftsmanship, suggests he did need extra support.
There's an image of Tutankhamun himself with his wife, Ankhesenamun, crouching at his feet, and the king is drawing back an arrow, but he's doing it from a seated position, and it somehow doesn't feel quite right. And there's another very, very beautiful image of the king and his wife on the lid of this box as well, and the king is shown leaning on a kind of walking stick. This is not the portrayal of a vigorous, athletic young pharaoh. It's the portrayal of somebody who's perhaps a little more vulnerable and weaker than that somehow.
This walking stick could be one of those now undergoing examination at the Grand Egyptian Museum. So what condition could have caused the young king to walk with a stick? More items recently restored could hold a clue. Andre has been working for the last 7 years on sandals belonging to Tutankhamun.
This is the big surprise then? Yes, you can see it now.
Wow, that is an amazing piece of work.
Before.
These sandals have been rescued from almost complete disintegration.
And all the gold bosses? It's a neat piece of work.
More than 80 pairs of shoes were discovered in Tutankhamun's tomb. From childhood sandals to grown man's shoes, It's one of the world's biggest collections of ancient footwear. But over 3,000 years of humidity has taken its toll. It melted the leather, and the gold decorations fell apart on the majority of the sandals. The shoes have been painstakingly pieced back together, and the design reveals some unusual features.
Tutankhamun had 3 pairs of open shoes in his tomb. And they are special mainly for the fact that they have additional ways of keeping them close to the foot, that they would fit very nicely. It has a strap between the first and the second toe, and in addition to that, a strap going over the foot, as if the shoe was not really fitting on the foot.
They're unlike anything Andre has ever seen from ancient Egypt. Normally, just like modern flip-flops, traditional Egyptian sandals had one strap between the first and second toe.
But apparently here it didn't work, so they needed something extra to let someone, the owner, and the king, of course, be able to walk properly.
Andre believes that without the straps, the shoe may have fallen off Tutankhamun's foot. But why did he need specially adapted shoes? What was wrong with a young king's feet? A clue to this puzzle lies in the remains of Tutankhamun himself, in the desert sands more than 400 miles south of Cairo. He was buried in the Valley of the Kings, near the ancient capital of Thebes, now modern-day Luxor. Carved into the desert rock, it's the final resting place of many great Egyptian pharaohs. The mummy of Tutankhamun lies where Carter first discovered it a century ago, in a small and unassuming tomb. And the body displays a number of unusual features.
Tutankhamun's been subjected to numerous anatomical investigations over the years. He's been photographed, he's been X-rayed, CT scanned, and all of these things have shown us anomalies which you wouldn't expect to see in the body of a fit 19-year-old. And his feet are of particular interest to us here. The left foot is rotated inwards, and the second toe is missing a bone, which suggests that he might have been suffering from some sort of inherited genetic illness. And if we're right in interpreting it this way, then he was suffering from what we would know as clubfoot. Tutankhamun was probably in quite a lot of pain, more or less constantly, and he would have had difficulty walking, and it would have been obvious to everybody looking at him that he was suffering.
A picture is emerging of a royal family beset by painful misfortune. Egyptologist Chris Naunton believes there may be a link between Tutankhamun's crippled feet and the fact that his stillborn children were buried alongside him. If true, what might other treasures from the tomb reveal about the king? Tutankhamun's throne is one of the many items about to be moved to the new Grand Egyptian Museum. Covered in pure gold and inlaid with semi-precious stones, the intricate centerpiece of this throne portrays the affection between the young king and his wife, Ankhesenamun.
Decoration on this throne is really all about the royal couple. We can see that in this very touchingly beautiful scene at the back here. Tutankhamun is reclining in a kind of very relaxed pose, one hand on the back of his chair, and Ankhesenamun is leaning in and placing a hand on his shoulder. It's a really very kind of natural, very beautiful scene.
But this touching family portrait is not quite what it seems.
Something that's quite interesting to remember, I think, about the royal couple is that although we can't be absolutely sure about this, they were almost certainly related. Probably at least half brother and half sister, if not full brother and sister.
If they were related, as Chris Naunton believes, then this throne depicts a disturbing picture of an incestuous relationship between Tutankhamun and his sister, the mother of his premature children. But there's little evidence of Tutankhamun's own parentage.
And this is odd not only because of the quantity of evidence we have for him, but because this is something that you would expect a king in ancient Egypt to tell us about. And not only the royals, but non-royal individuals in ancient Egypt as well were keen to tell us, you know, I am the son of, I'm the daughter of, the sister of, the brother of. We don't have that information for Tutankhamun.
It seems Tutankhamun may have deliberately chosen to keep the identity of his parents a secret. And his family tree has puzzled Egyptologists for over 90 years. Now scientists are working to uncover this 3,000-year-old secret. And the more they discover, the darker the story gets. In Italy, anthropologist Albert Zink has spent years using DNA analysis to shed more light on the life of Tutankhamun and his ancestors.
Thanks to the study of the mummy, of the person himself, we learned a lot about Tutankhamun, about his real life. So sometimes when we are doing all this analysis with the mummies, when you're taking out the samples, we also think about what are these mummies, who were these mummies, what lives they lived, how was their life, how did they think, how did they feel.
Using the latest technology, Dr. Zink has produced an unprecedented DNA profile of the members of Tutankhamun's royal family, also known as the 18th dynasty. In 2010, Zink gained access to 11 mummies stored in museums across Egypt, believed to be a part of Tutankhamun's royal family. The mummies were originally discovered in several tombs in the Valley of the Kings, and all dated to the same time as Tutankhamun. Zink then took a sample of Tutankhamun's DNA and compared it to that of the 11 mummies, searching for unique genetic codes inside the DNA, known as markers.
When we determined the genetic fingerprint of a person, we were looking at certain genetic regions, and we are looking at markers and see how many times a certain sequence is repeated.
The genetic markers of two of the mummies appeared to be directly related to Tutankhamun. One belonged to his predecessor, the despised pharaoh, Akhenaten, and the other was from an unknown woman in another tomb. For Albert Zink, it's evidence that he had finally found Tutankhamun's parents. But it's not the only thing that Zink discovered. Further results revealed the shocking reality of the royal family tree.
When we compare the genetic fingerprint of the parents, we see that they are closely related. And by confirming this analysis, by looking at the genetic fingerprint of their parents, we could figure out that they are also brother and sister.
Like his own prematurely born children, Tutankhamun was also the product of an incestuous marriage. It's a grim revelation, but in ancient Egypt, interfamily marriages were the norm rather than the exception. The royals believed they were descended from the gods, and marrying commoners would dilute their divine blood. So they kept everything in the family. Unknown to them, this incestuous family planning tradition would lead the dynasty to its death. A less than perfect picture of Tutankhamun's royal family has emerged. The crumbling remains of his stillborn daughters at the Grand Egyptian Museum, along with evidence of his deformities, suggest personal tragedy and pain. But could they be linked to Tutankhamun's incestuous family line? Hutan Ashrafian, a surgeon at the Imperial College London, has studied the ramifications of incestuous relationships through generations. His work shows the detrimental effects of inbreeding.
This is a normal family tree. There are 8 great-grandparents, 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and 1 individual at the base of that tree. There's a branching pattern, which means that the good genes are persisting in each generation to that individual at the base of that branching pattern. Let's look at Tutankhamun's family tree. Here, rather than there being a branching pattern, there is an abnormal ladder shape, or what we call pedigree collapse. Here, brothers are marrying sisters to have offspring, and this means that the weaker genes are being transmitted to each generation that will eventually cause disease.
It seems that Tutankhamun's family tree was poisoned by generations of incest, resulting in more dramatic and debilitating effects with each generation. Dr. Ashrafian thinks some of those genetic abnormalities from this inbreeding can be seen in the statues of Tutankhamun's father, Akhenaten. They reveal a body unlike that of any previous pharaohs.
What we see when we start looking at it is initially at his face, it's very long and drawn out. If we go to his body, overall image is that of a rather slender man with a feminine distribution of fat. Now, this is not normal in the period of ancient Egypt because typically the god kings were very masculinized and were demonstrated to be very strong, and in Akhenaten here we see someone that is less so.
It's likely that Tutankhamun's deformities were a result of generations of inbreeding. But it was his unborn children who paid the ultimate price for the royal family's incestuous tradition.
Another consequence of inbreeding is that of miscarriages and stillbirths. Now, we know from Tutankhamun's own tomb that there were 2 stillborn fetuses, and these probably were the result of his offspring with his sister, causing these early deaths in his line.
Some experts now suspect that this genetic inheritance could have played a part in Tutankhamun's early death. In the Grand Egyptian Museum, some of the most spectacular items might hold the answer. 6 chariots were found in Tutankhamun's tomb. For director of the museum, Dr. Tariq Taufik, it's obvious these chariots were not just gifts for the afterlife.
So the king would have been standing inside his chariot with the scenes of captives and of enemies on his chariot.
But the chariot wasn't just for show. New research reveals it was a highly functional piece of military equipment. For the first time since Howard Carter discovered them, these chariots have been taken apart and examined by a joint team of Japanese and Egyptian experts. Modern X-rays and 3D imaging technology have revealed flexible joints made using complex leather wrappings. An ancient suspension system hugely advanced for its time. But why did an almost certainly disabled king need this supercar of the ancient world? The answer lies in this barren desert, Tutankhamun's childhood home. When Tutankhamun's father, Akhenaten, was Egypt's ruler, Akhenaten rejected centuries of ancient Egyptian religious belief. He established a new cult and moved the capital from Thebes to Amarna, 250 miles away. Archaeologist Anna Stevens has spent 19 years investigating Akhenaten's bizarre decision to build a city in the middle of nowhere. Today, all that remains of the city are shattered stones of its temples and palaces. Among them, Anna discovered a burial ground. But it wasn't an ordinary cemetery.
So when we first started to excavate here, gradually we began to realize that there was something unusual going on. So one by one, we kept encountering burials that had more than one person in them, often 2 or 3 people, but in one case, up to 5 people.
Even more surprising was the age of the people buried in these graves.
Most of the people buried here were between 6 years of age and 25 years of age.
And what we think is that we've stumbled upon a cemetery that was used by laborers who had to build the new city for Akhenaten.
Anna believes Tutankhamun's father's new city was built by children, and they died in enormous numbers.
What's really striking about the cemetery is that despite the young age, the skeletons are still showing up signs of very heavy labour loads, poor nutritional conditions. It looks as though they're effectively being worked to death.
Akhenaten wanted to build his new capital city at any cost, and evidence suggests a whole generation paid for it with their lives. For Egypt, its consequences were catastrophic. Engrossed in his vanity building project, Akhenaten appears to have abandoned international politics. By the time he died, Egypt was in turmoil. This was the Egypt 9-year-old Tutankhamun inherited, a fractured country on the brink of collapse. The young king needed to put Egypt back on the map as an international power, and the fastest, most effective way to do that was war. Tutankhamun had to lead his people and his army through the treacherous times that followed his father's rule. A state-of-the-art chariot would have given him the heroic status and respect he so badly needed. But with Tutankhamun's disability, could he even ride a chariot? To find out, podiatrist Ron McCulloch is creating a 3D model of how Tutankhamun might have walked.
Comfortable? It's comfortable now, okay.
Special bandages restrict the movement and replicate the position of Tutankhamun's feet.
So we know that Tutankhamun had a number of foot deformities and ankle deformities. And this included the club foot on the left side and the very flat foot or flatter foot on the right side.
Motion sensors capture the movements, allowing Ron to analyze them using special software. It's immediately obvious that these deformities would have put an enormous strain on the young pharaoh's feet.
So we've just done a detailed analysis of movement patterns, both of the whole body and also of the foot. So we have a good idea now how Tutankhamun may have walked. The reality is that this was a boy, 19 years old, who had very significant deformities that profoundly affected the way that he walked.
Tutankhamun's deformities would have also made it hard for him to stand.
We also looked at postural sway. Postural sway represents how much we move when trying to stand still. We all wobble a bit, but a certain amount of movement is normal. So in the case of Tutankhamun's investigation, the movement patterns were about 3 times greater than they should have been. And this would have been very challenging for him, for example, when standing at ceremonies or when using or being in a chariot.
These balance issues would have made it very difficult for the young Tutankhamun to ride and control a chariot. With evidence of Tutankhamun leading his country through treacherous times, despite his disability, a possible scenario of his death is emerging. An X-ray of Tutankhamun's mummy holds the most convincing evidence yet as to what caused his premature death.
Well, the mummy of Tutankhamun, in fact, exhibits a number of abnormalities. We can see perhaps some of those from this X-ray here. On the left-hand side, a huge chunk of the rib cage is completely missing, and on the same side of the body, a chunk of the pelvis, the upper pelvis, is missing as well.
And injuries of this type are characteristic to a particular kind of trauma.
It's a blunt trauma, which seems to have affected a large part of the left-hand side of his body, perhaps crushed his rib cage and the soft tissue underneath as well. Now, in modern times, if you were looking for the kind of accident that might cause injuries like this, you'd probably be thinking of something like a car crash.
In the ancient world, the closest thing to a car was a chariot. Tutankhamun, his body racked by pain and instability, was eager to be the king his country needed. But did he push himself too far? Could this be how he died? In a chariot accident, leading his armies to re-establish Egypt's dominance in the region.
If Tutankhamun had been struck by a chariot running at full speed, it's inconceivable that the injuries wouldn't have been fatal. It would have crushed his rib cage, it would have crushed the soft tissue underneath, and organs like the heart wouldn't have been salvageable for mummification. We'll never know, perhaps, how Tutankhamun died, but in any case, Tutankhamun's early death, however it happened, was a great change, a great turning point in history.
When Tutankhamun died, so did his royal line, the 18th dynasty. His unborn daughters were the last remnants of a family that had ruled Egypt for almost 250 years. The toxic legacy of his father would ultimately lead to Tutankhamun being forgotten for 3,000 years. The forensic investigation of Tutankhamun's treasures has revealed his royal family was steeped in incest and cursed by disease and deformity. Toxic genetic inheritance likely killed Tutankhamun's 2 daughters. At the Grand Egyptian Museum, the fragile remains of the 2 babies are about to be painstakingly preserved. Oxygen causes rapid deterioration, so the museum team uses chemical elements to create an oxygen-free environment.
We are going to keep them in a microenvironment. In this microenvironment, we are going to put some elements that are going to absorb oxygen and eliminate it from the surrounding of the fetuses.
Saved from further disintegration, these fetuses are powerful reminders of the human side of King Tutankhamun.
Looking at these fetuses, we see a dramatic part of the life of Tutankhamun, the wish to have children, most probably the wish to have an heir, which was never given to Tutankhamun.
Preserving the fetuses might allow future technological advances to reveal further hidden secrets about Tutankhamun.
The fetuses are among the most fascinating of all the objects found in the tomb, and they speak to Tutankhamun's hopes and desires for the future. They tell us 2 things, in fact: that he would have wanted to have children, but also that he wasn't successful in that. And that would have wider implications for Egypt as well. As Carter himself says, had one of those babes lived, there might never have been a Ramesses. And so not only was this a personal tragedy for Tutankhamun, it would also change the course of Egyptian history.
Tutankhamun's hopes for Egypt's future stopped with his 2 stillborn children. His untimely death without heirs created a power vacuum and plunged Egypt into turmoil. Hidden away in the Valley of the Kings, in the tomb of the Golden Pharaoh himself, lies evidence of the power struggle that followed. Tutankhamun's tomb is decorated with scenes depicting the journey from the world of the living to the world of the dead. One image is particularly telling.
It's one of the most interesting aspects of the decoration of the tomb, I think. The figure on the left in the white is Tutankhamun. He's identified by the inscription above him, but he's in the guise of Osiris as a god. So he's passed from life into afterlife at this point. So he's dead, and in fact, he's in kind of mummy form at this point. The figure to the right is performing a ceremony, a ritual, which we know as the opening of the mouth for breathing on the mummy of Tutankhamun.
Here, the ritual normally performed by the next of kin, or a high priest, is performed by Ai, a senior official in Tutankhamun's court. He wasn't even from the royal family. He was a commoner.
The reanimation of the body in this way is a really important part of the survival of the individual from life into the afterlife. So to have Ai in this position as the person performing this crucial ritual shows that he is the anointed successor of Tutankhamun.
To seal his claim to the throne, Ai married Tutankhamun's widow, Ankhesenamun, and became the next pharaoh of Egypt. Many now believe Ai wanted the young pharaoh to be forgotten. He crammed the dead king and his belongings into a small, insignificant tomb and took Tutankhamun's grand tomb for himself. But it was only the first of many injustices Tutankhamun suffered after his death. The memories of destruction caused to Egypt by Tutankhamun's father, Akhenaten, were still raw. Tutankhamun had to pay for the sins of his father. More than 2,000 miles from Luxor in the British Museum, Egyptologist Aidan Dodson has come to see the final evidence of this campaign of condemnation.
This here is a king list drawn up during the reign of Ramesses II, and it represents an official listing of the kings of Egypt from the unification down to his time.
Found in a temple close to Luxor, the list of 76 kings of Egypt was created almost 100 years after Tutankhamun's death. But it's what's missing on this list that is the most intriguing.
The cartouche on the right with the seated woman in the middle of it is Amenhotep III, the father of Akhenaten and grandfather of Tutankhamun. On the left is Horemheb. Tutankhamun should be on that line between those two cartouches there. He's not there. It's not only Tutankhamun who's missing, there's also Akhenaten and Ai, Tutankhamun's predecessor and successor. And it's no coincidence those are people who've been edited out, because by the time we get to the reign of Ramesses II, that whole group of kings were non-people. As far as Egyptian history was concerned, it all never happened.
The genetic curse on Tutankhamun's family meant he died tragically young and unable to produce an heir. And his royal line ended with him. Within a century of Tutankhamun's death, his very existence was erased from history. Until 3,000 years later, when Howard Carter broke open the doors of his hidden tomb, exposing the treasures that have captivated the world ever since. Now, with all 5,398 objects from the tomb reunited at the new Grand Egyptian Museum, Tutankhamun is being resurrected through modern science, and forensic investigations are revealing the final secrets hidden among his treasures.
All of these objects that will be on display will flesh out Tutankhamun. You know, the skeleton of this boy will turn into the full figure of the king and the man.
A fresh chapter in Tutankhamun's story is unfolding. It appears he was much more than just the boy king of popular belief. He was a father, a husband, and a dynamic leader with remarkable ambitions brutally cut short by the toxic bloodline of his own family. Tutankhamun's spectacular treasures. Now, for the first time since they were discovered, all 5,398 objects are being brought together in a new $1 billion museum. This will be the first time many of them have been seen for a century.
Look at the horse, look at the horse, look at the horse.
Scientists have been using the latest imaging and forensic technology to unlock long-buried mysteries, to reveal the man behind the mask.
So many tiny details are visible again.
This wasn't just a hall of treasure, it was a veritable arsenal.
Not of a boy king, but a warrior on a global stage. Egypt's spectacular Tutankhamun. He's the most famous, most studied pharaoh in history. But even today, Tutankhamun's treasures still have much to reveal. Now, the most comprehensive forensic examination of all Tutankhamun's 5,000 treasures is underway. And several key objects have captured experts' attention. At the heart of the investigation, a mysterious dagger found on Tutankhamun's mummified body. Priceless golden chariot decorations, painstakingly reconstructed after resting in fragments for 3,500 years. And the leather remains of a strange armored tunic. These three treasures will tell us much more about the real Tutankhamun. Not as a boy, but as a warrior. It's a new chapter in a story that began in the Valley of the Kings on the afternoon of November 26, 1922. In the barren desert, west of the Nile, British archaeologist Howard Carter made the greatest archaeological discovery of all time. The almost completely intact tomb of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, Tutankhamun. Egyptologist Dr. Chris Naunton has been given a rare chance to get up close to Howard Carter's personal account of the momentous discovery.
This is Howard Carter's journal, and it's amazing for me to see this because it really is as close as you can get to the very moment that Carter looked on this incredible hall of objects for the very first time.
This meticulously handwritten entry records Carter's astonishment as he peered inside the tomb, becoming the first person to gaze on its wonders for 3,500 years.
It says, the interior of the chamber gradually loomed before one with its strange and wonderful medley of extraordinary and beautiful objects heaped upon one another. When Lord Carnarvon said to me, "Can you see anything?" I replied to him, "Yes, it is wonderful."
Tutankhamun's treasures captivated the world. In the months and years following their discovery, they were painstakingly excavated and transferred to the Cairo Museum. Since then, millions of visitors have marveled at many of the items found in Tutankhamun's tomb. These iconic treasures paint a picture of a pampered boy king who died tragically young. This is the Tutankhamun every school child knows. A boy too young to rule, an emotionally and physically weak puppet ruler. But this image is based on the tiny handful of Tutankhamun's treasures on display in the Cairo Museum that make up just a fraction of the 5,000 objects found in Tutankhamun's burial chamber. The rest have been locked away in the museum's basement until now. The new Grand Egyptian Museum is now gathering together all of Tutankhamun's treasures with the aim of putting the whole collection on display for the first time since their discovery in 1922. The treasures in these boxes will shed new light on the story of Tutankhamun. Thousands of objects were simply packed away when they were first unearthed and have never been studied or analyzed. But now, in the cutting-edge labs and storerooms of the Grand Egyptian Museum, all this is about to change. Behind this unassuming door lies an Egyptologist's paradise.
Welcome in storage 93, especially for artifacts of Tutankhamun.
Filled with priceless treasures and dripping with gold. In this room, Tutankhamun's prized possessions are being brought together to be stored and conserved in climate-controlled conditions.
There's some boats, staffs, there are beds.
Chris Naunton is one of a tiny handful of experts to gain entry.
This is a super exciting moment to be here, to see all of this material being ready for exhibition in the new museum. It's once in a lifetime kind of chance to see this.
The last time these treasures were together was inside Tutankhamun's tomb. Professor Salima Ikram believes it's only now, by seeing the treasures together, that Egyptologists can begin to tell the full story of the pharaoh's life.
There is so much material in the tomb of Tutankhamun. It's really a bit like an attic where, you know, people's mothers have put all of their bits and pieces so that they have their memories, they have their entire life encapsulated from babyhood onwards. And Tutankhamun's tomb is like opening up his attic and being able to see inside his past life.
Seen together, Tutankhamun's treasures are now painting a radical new portrait. Not the boy king as many had thought. This is Tutankhamun, the warrior king.
Inside the tomb, Howard Carter found 6 chariots, 7 throw sticks, 4 daggers, dozens of bows, hundreds of arrows, 8 shields, and a unique and sophisticated set of armor. So this wasn't just a haul of treasure, it was a veritable arsenal of weapons.
But these weren't the toys of a boy king. It would seem they were the weapons of a man.
People romantically call Tutankhamun the boy king, and that's because he came to the throne when he was 9.5. But he died when he was about 19, and by the age of 14 in ancient Egypt, you were a man. So really, it's more of a romantic myth calling him the boy king, because he really was a proper, truly grown-up king.
Today, this king's story is being rewritten by the artifacts he took to the afterlife. And there's one treasure Tutankhamun seems to have highly valued. Tucked away in a corner of the Cairo Museum lies a small dagger with a big secret. The latest technology has revealed startling new information about this weapon, soon to be moved to the Grand Egyptian Museum. Information that is out of this world. The sheer scale of Tutankhamun's treasures is breathtaking. From golden effigies, to elaborate beds, to simple items of clothing. But Tutankhamun was also buried with an arsenal of weapons.
Just drawer after drawer after drawer, all containing arrows.
Yes.
This entire section.
Yes.
Just for this one kind of object. It's amazing.
In this 2nd millennia BC stockpile, there's one weapon that Tutankhamun seemed to have highly treasured. Since its discovery, this spectacular dagger has been on display in the Cairo Museum. Tucked away in a corner, passed by as visitors flock to Tutankhamun's big-ticket treasures.
Might not be the most famous object that was discovered in the tomb, but I think this dagger is one of the most interesting.
This deadly weapon contains a secret that's been hidden in plain sight for nearly a century. Now the dagger has been reanalyzed to reveal Tutankhamun as a warrior, hungry for power in this world and beyond. The dagger was found inside Tutankhamun's coffin. It was resting directly on his body.
This was one of the most important objects for Tutankhamun, it seems. It was found very close to the mummy, just above the king's abdomen.
It's clear there was something special about this dagger to Tutankhamun, and there's no doubting its beauty.
Its handle is extremely finely decorated in gold, and these bands which are inlaid with precious materials. The pommel at the end is made of rock crystal. This sheath made of beaten gold is decorated with this very intricate floral pattern.
But Tutankhamun's tomb was dripping in gold and gems. So why was this dagger buried inside his coffin on his body? What made it so precious? The answer lies in the dagger's blade.
Perhaps the most interesting aspect of it actually is the blade, which is made of iron.
Iron is one of the most common elements on Earth. But in Tutankhamun's Egypt, iron was rarer than gold.
3,500 years ago, iron was almost non-existent in Egypt. We don't get any archaeological evidence for iron smelting in this part of the world until the 6th century BC.
That's 800 years after Tutankhamun died. The iron in the dagger's blade wasn't mined or smelted in Egypt. So where did it come from? The mystery has puzzled experts since the dagger's discovery nearly a century ago. But until recently, there was no way to know where the iron in the blade came from without destroying it. Now, thanks to the use of advanced non-destructive X-ray analysis, curators can shed new light on this ancient mystery. Because there's more than iron in this blade.
This technique allows us to see the kind of unique chemical fingerprint of the blade of this dagger. And crucially, it tells us the percentage of the various different elements.
Iron occurs in nature, mixed with other elements. And this mixture is unique to each source of the metal. By identifying the blade's unique chemical fingerprint, the curators have been able to pinpoint its origin.
So just we need everyone to move away for 3 meters, please, for health and safety, because we are now going to run the X-ray.
The machine fires high-energy X-rays into the dagger blade, and it's the energy reflected back that reveals the elements contained inside.
Okay, it's done. So what we have now is the result of X-ray test. And we can see the elements here of the chemical composition, and we can see now 3 peaks, which of the iron and nickel and cobalt.
Okay.
What the curators found was the proportion of nickel was unusually high.
What does this tell us about the kind of iron that was used to make this dagger?
I mean, this kind of chemical composition is not found on the smelted iron found in Egypt, or even in this planet.
There's no match on Earth for the iron in this dagger.
If this iron doesn't come from this planet, where does it come from?
It's only coming from the meteorite.
From a meteorite?
Meteorite, yes.
The iron in Tutankhamun's dagger is extraterrestrial. Its journey began thousands, perhaps millions of years ago. From the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, 250 million miles away, a lump of rock and metal plummeted faster than a bullet toward Earth. It slammed into the planet's surface, shattering into fragments of molten iron. Somewhere in the sands of Africa, these fragments lay for thousands, even millions of years, until they were found and collected to be melted, forged and crafted into an object of rare beauty and power. The iron in this dagger has been on an extraordinary journey. Egyptologist Aidan Dodson believes Tutankhamun knew this iron fell from the heavens.
Back 1,500 or 2,000 years earlier than Tutankhamun, they talk about iron from the sky as being a somewhat miraculous material. The iron has a power, it's from the gods.
To Tutankhamun, the dagger must have seemed like a gift from the gods. Now, another hidden set of artifacts, not seen in their original glory for 3,500 years, are shedding new light on Tutankhamun's ambition. A unique combination of images that display him as a powerful ruler of not just Egypt, but the world. Tutankhamun took 6 chariots to the afterlife, carefully dismantled and stacked in his tomb's antechamber. When Howard Carter discovered the tomb, he found at least 1,500 tiny gold flakes under the chariot. He didn't have the technology to deal with these bewildering metal fragments, so he put them in a box in the hope that someone in the future might. Now, decades later, these gold fragments have been finally reassembled. World-renowned gold conservator Dr. Christian Ekman has been piecing the flakes together. His work reveals a series of stunning images that show Tutankhamun at the center of the world.
So many tiny details are visible again, which were not visible when they were excavated.
Ekman discovered these gold fragments are parts of golden panels, once used as decorations on the harnesses and trappings of Tutankhamun's chariots. These bewildering, fragile jigsaw puzzles have so far taken 3 years to piece together.
So every single piece which we could reattach to the gold sheet is another part of the huge puzzle. But still there are missing pieces, and we try, of course, now to fix those little things, back to its original position.
Ekman has pieced together at least 70 intricately embossed gold panels, made to decorate 6 leather chariot harnesses. And they would have made a powerful impression on everyone who saw them. These images haven't been seen since the doors were sealed on Tutankhamun's tomb 3,500 years ago. For Egyptologist Professor Salima Ikram, interpreting them is an incredible privilege.
This material is fabulous because it's never been on display before, even though it is from the tomb of the most famous king, Tutankhamun.
Salima has been decoding these images, designs that reveal Tutankhamun's ambitions stretched far beyond Egypt's borders.
The Tutankhamun chariot leather is unusual because it doesn't just have normal Egyptian propaganda imagery. At first glance, you think, oh, this is just sort of animals fighting amongst themselves. But then you realize that there's a griffin involved, which is a Near Eastern animal. Some of the plants used are very much in the Syrian tradition. And then you have this running spiral, which is Aegean. So you've got this cocktail of great empires and great artistic traditions coming together.
These foreign designs were deliberately chosen to present Tutankhamun as a player on an international stage and the most powerful ruler in the ancient world.
This combination of styles seems to emphasize the fact that he wanted to show that he had very long-reaching arms of power, as it were, and he could control all sorts of places and people.
The gold decorations from the harnesses suggest Tutankhamun wanted to be seen as an international statesman. And a chariot about to be moved to the Grand Egyptian Museum shows just how far he was prepared to go in pursuit of that power.
So this chariot is going to be 3D scanned today. And so first thing that has to happen, of course, is that this case, which has been protecting it for decades, is coming off right before our eyes here.
For Egyptologist Chris Naunton, it's an amazing opportunity to examine the chariot's lavishly decorated surfaces. Before it's transported, the chariot's current condition must be rigorously analyzed.
So what's happening is that this handheld device is being used to take in rapid succession a whole sequence of images which are creating a digital model of the chariot. And this is incredibly important because we need to understand the condition, the shape of the chariot in its current situation so that it can then be reassessed when it goes into the new Grand Egyptian Museum.
The detailed digital model will ensure the chariot remains in exactly the same condition after it's moved.
One of the things that's just incredible about being up this close with these objects is you get a sense of the incredibly fine detail.
Few people ever get beyond the protective glass to study this chariot. So it's a rare opportunity to see just how the young pharaoh wanted the world to see him.
What we can see here is some of this utterly exquisite decoration on the inside of this chariot. It's rendered in beaten gold, and it shows a frieze of foreign captives, enemies of Tutankhamun.
But this beautiful decoration depicts graphic brutality that indicates Tutankhamun would stop at nothing in the pursuit of power.
There's a rope which runs right the way along this scene, which is binding them all. Some of them are tied by the neck, some of them have their hands behind their backs, some of them have their hands tied at their wrists and above their heads.
Their detailed features and distinctive costumes identify the captives as Egypt's traditional enemies from the south and the north.
He was trying to convey this idea of being the ruler over all of the foreign people who surrounded his country.
Armed with an iron dagger from the gods, and proclaiming his power from a chariot decorated with golden images of his international supremacy, Tutankhamun set out to dominate the ancient world. But these treasures appear to be too beautiful for the battlefield. So was all this just for show? A king playing at being a soldier? Or was it a genuine warning that Tutankhamun was a serious warrior king? Now, groundbreaking new research into a mysterious armored tunic found inside Tutankhamun's tomb could provide the answer.
It was really a state-of-art piece of military equipment.
This is the critical piece of the puzzle that could prove just how far Tutankhamun was prepared to go in pursuit of power. And it raises the possibility that Tutankhamun was willing to go to war. In the state-of-the-art labs of the Grand Egyptian Museum, ancient leather specialist Lucy Skinner has come to see one of Tutankhamun's most intriguing treasures. This unique armored vest could help prove something extraordinary. That Tutankhamun, dismissed for nearly a century as a powerless boy king, was willing to go to war.
Oh, wow.
These are the remains of Tutankhamun's personal armored tunic. It would have been an impressive and intimidating sight. Now, 3,500 years after it was entombed with Tutankhamun, And after nearly a century in storage, it's been moved to the Grand Egyptian Museum. For Lucy, it's her first opportunity to analyze the armor up close.
It's fantastic to see it like this. I've been working with ancient Egyptian leather for almost a decade, and finally I get to see this item. Actually, that piece, can you...
Nothing like it has ever been found from ancient Egypt. Lucy believes understanding how the armor was made will shed new light on why it was made and prove whether it was made for show or for battle. At least 2,000 leather scales were stitched together to overlap. Ridges prevented the scales from being forced apart. The result was flexible, resilient armor.
You can really see clearly, can't you, how the ridges on each of these scales, they're overlapping each other. If an arrow were to hit the armor, these ridges prevent it somehow from coming apart. Yes. So it gives some added protection.
Lucy believes a sophisticated manufacturing technique made the armor strong and flexible, a practical piece of equipment rather than a ceremonial showpiece. And to confirm her theory, Lucy wants to examine two similar-sized scales in detail.
So this technique is called reflectance transformation imaging. It's an imaging process where you take a series of photographs with different lighting angles, and then the shadows and the highlights from each image are amalgamated into one. And it just highlights the details, surface details, really, really, really clearly on the surface of the object. So this is really excellent. This is great. We can really see the texture on the surface.
It's the first time these scales have ever been examined in forensic detail. And Lucy immediately notices a striking similarity between the two scales.
Zoom in a little bit on the...
On the right.
These scales, they're almost exactly the same, aren't they? In the same size, the same width, the ridges are in exactly the same position. They're extremely consistent. I mean, it really suggests that they found the optimal kind of method for making these things, and then they were reproducing it again and again and again.
To Lucy, the best explanation for the scales' similarity is that they were made using a mold.
The medial ridge, you can really see that it's very defined. I mean, it strongly looks like it's been pushed with some pressure into a mold.
Molding the leather would make the scales consistent, thick, and strong. Lucy believes one reason to do that would be to make Tutankhamun's armor battle-ready.
The way the surface looks super compact like this, it definitely, this would deflect quite a large impact, I think.
Ingeniously designed and meticulously manufactured, this armor was made to withstand arrows. Lucy believes it wasn't for show, it was for battle. And Tutankhamun could have worn it on the battlefield.
It was really a state-of-art piece of military equipment. It was almost like the Kevlar vest of the ancient Egyptian world.
A real warrior facing real threat would want such advanced armor. But who was Tutankhamun planning to go to war with? Who did he feel threatened by, and why? In the storerooms of the new Grand Egyptian Museum, Egyptologist Professor Salima Ikram has found a bow belonging to Tutankhamun that pictures his worst enemies.
Golly, we've never seen this before.
It's the first time to see it.
Since its discovery nearly a century ago, this bow has been locked away in the basement of the old Cairo Museum.
This is the top of the bow, because this has got the enemies of the north, and that's got the enemies of the south. The Nubians are in the south, and various Asiatics are in the north, and in fact, sometimes the Libyans as well.
Salima believes this bow was never fired in anger. It's too beautiful for the battlefield. But it's a critical clue in Tutankhamun's story, because it reveals a country and a pharaoh under threat. To the south, insurgencies in the colony of Nubia threatened Egypt's supply of gold and precious goods from Africa. To the northwest, Libyan tribes made violent incursions into Egyptian territory. And in the east, the aggressive Hittite Empire advanced through Syria, ever closer to Egypt's borders.
Egypt was in turmoil. Its allies had become enemies, and the expansionist, aggressive Hittites were knocking on Egypt's door.
This is why Tutankhamun was buried with an arsenal of weapons, as well as the celestial dagger and high-tech armor. Curators at the Grand Egyptian Museum are unpacking dozens of functional bows, hundreds of arrows, shields and throw sticks. Together, they're painting a picture of Tutankhamun as a warrior king, with the hardware and the motivation to go to war. And this is forcing Egyptologists to look again at all of Tutankhamun's treasures. Even those that have been on display in the Old Cairo Museum for decades. Could Tutankhamun's true identity have been hidden in plain sight? Was the warrior king in front of us all along?
So this is a box from the tomb of Tutankhamun, and it's decorated on all sides with scenes of the king in his chariot going off after the enemies.
And he's waging war using the exact same weapons that Egyptologists and scientists are analyzing at the Grand Egyptian Museum. The large bow, arrows, and armored tunic, the decorated harness, and chariot.
Have the king shown riding his chariot, and he draws this massive bow and lets fly. And all of the enemies from the south are then being hit by his arrows and are falling down at his feet. And what's nice then is, on the other side, you have a very similar thing happening, but this is for the northern enemies of Egypt. So they're, they're big bearded people from the Syria area, and they're being trampled by the king's horses. They're going to go under the wheels of the chariots. And again, Tutankhamun is loosening his bow, and off they go.
This is Tutankhamun, the warrior king, in the thick of battle, leading from the front.
We've got a sense of the landscape and the chaos and the heat. It's fantastic.
Since its discovery nearly a century ago, the images on this box have been dismissed as fantasy. But the weapons pictured on the box are the same as the weapons found in Tutankhamun's tomb. So if the weapons shown here were real, were these events real too? Are these violent battle scenes closer to reality than some have previously thought? Did Tutankhamun lead Egypt's armies into battle? The answer lies outside the Grand Egyptian Museum, on the banks of the Nile at Thebes, in the spectacular ruins of Luxor Temple. This was ancient Egypt's religious capital, and every pharaoh wanted to make their mark here by recycling and recarving stones from earlier buildings.
We don't have a lot of evidence for Tutankhamun's buildings, but we do have fragments here and there that suggest that he might have erected temples, and that if he did, he would have included battle scenes like this.
Today, Tutankhamun's battle carvings are scattered across the site. Pieces of a colossal, seemingly impossible, three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Archaeologist Ray Johnson has spent 20 years painstakingly recording and digitally reassembling Tutankhamun's battle scenes, with fascinating results. The chillingly vivid details include severed hands skewered on sticks and a caged prisoner hanging from a ship's mast. Egyptologist Aidan Dodson believes these carvings are more than simply propaganda, as many have thought.
The nature of these reliefs is such that they don't appear to be stereotyped ones. They seem to be specific, and therefore I think there's a reasonable case to be made that these blocks from Luxor do report a particular campaign.
And in this campaign, Tutankhamun takes center stage.
It seems likely that the king had some direct involvement physically in these campaigns, and there's no reason to assume that the king, if he's being shown there, wasn't actually there.
Some Egyptologists now believe these shattered fragments of stone record real historical events, and that the image of Tutankhamun as a frail boy king has to be reassessed.
He wouldn't be, in that case, a kind of feeble, diseased guy who had trouble walking, couldn't possibly have participated in any sort of athletic events. Instead, we'd be looking at a kind of a young, vigorous, athletic warrior.
The celestial dagger and decorated chariot reveal a man hungry for power. The arsenal of weapons and high-tech armor suggest he was ready to fight. And the painted box and carved battle scenes are powerful evidence that Tutankhamun led his armies into battle. Together, these treasures suggest a different image of the world's most famous pharaoh, as a warrior king who may have gone to war and possibly never returned. In the labs of the new Grand Egyptian Museum, history is being re-examined, and a picture of Tutankhamun as a warrior king has emerged. A man hungry for power, protected by high-tech armor, and a magical iron dagger from the gods, leading from the front in the heat of battle. A man who died at age 19. Did the young pharaoh die in battle? Did Tutankhamun make the ultimate sacrifice? In the Valley of the Kings, inside the tomb where he was laid to rest 3,500 years ago, lies the mummified body of Tutankhamun. For 33 centuries, oils and resins have preserved his body and his secrets. For the last century, since his tomb's discovery, debate has raged over his cause of death.
There has been endless speculation about whether he had malaria, whether he had septicemia, which killed him, whether he'd been hit on the head. So really, a lot of ink has been spilt on this.
Instead, Salima believes the key to discovering what killed Tutankhamun isn't to investigate how he died, but where. And she thinks this X-ray of Tutankhamun's skull contains a clue.
Here's his skull, and this is a layer of resin, and this is a second layer of resin. So the fact that there are two different layers of resin suggests that Tutankhamun was mummified in a two-part sort of process, which is very unusual.
Mummification needed to begin within days of death.
Immediately, what you have to do is void the body of its internal organs and sometimes even the brain, because otherwise you get bacteria and you puff up and you might explode.
The two-part process may be a sign that Tutankhamun was mummified temporarily to prevent decomposition before a full mummification could take place.
It is possible that he died away from the Nile Valley, and so some form of initial mummification was carried out. It could be because he was on an expedition of some sort. Now, it could be that he was fighting some sort of campaign in the desert, not close to the Nile.
A chest X-ray reveals something even stranger.
There's something very obvious missing, because there's no heart. And the Egyptians always kept the heart in the body because you have to keep the heart in order to make a safe transition between this world and the next. The absence of the heart might suggest that whoever carried out the mummification was not as skilled as they should have been, or that Tutankhamun needed immediately attention somewhere far from where the top-class embalmers were.
The evidence suggests Tutankhamun could have died far from home. Around late 1323 BC, Egypt's armies were 750 miles from home in northern Syria, fighting their arch-enemies, the Hittites. If Tutankhamun was the warrior king that the evidence suggests, then chances are he could have been there too.
We know that Egypt was involved in military activities in northern Syria. Whether or not Tutankhamun was at the head of the armies right in the depths of Syria, one can probably argue the idea that he actually was up there in Syria with the Egyptian armies seems pretty persuasive.
It's possible Tutankhamun fought and died in this campaign in a distant corner of Egypt's empire. Cut down in the prime of his life as a warrior king.
Well, perhaps Tutankhamun died just as he was leaving his mark. He'd begun to regain territory overseas which had been lost, to re-establish Egypt as the great power in the region. And, you know, who knows, if he'd lived, perhaps he would have had a great and glorious reign and his dynasty would have carried on for a long time. And history would have been very different.
As the thousands of Tutankhamun's treasures are reunited at the new Grand Egyptian Museum, many paint a picture of a young pharaoh determined to stamp Egypt's mark on the world. A celestial knife, one of his most personal and prized possessions. Newly restored gold chariot decorations depicting an international statesman, and cutting-edge body armor suggesting he was ready to go into battle for his country. Together they tell the story of Tutankhamun as a warrior, not a boy, but a man who may have made the ultimate sacrifice. Tutankhamun's spectacular treasures. Now, for the first time since they were discovered, all 5,398 objects are being brought together in a new $1 billion museum. This will be the first time many of them have been seen for a century.
Look at the horse, look at the horse, look at the horse.
Scientists have been using the latest imaging and forensic technology to unlock long-buried mysteries, to reveal the man behind the mask.
So many tiny details are visible again.
And one treasure has caused more speculation over the years than any other: Tutankhamun's death mask.
Some scholars have begun to suggest that this may not belong to him at all.
Now, who the mask was actually made for may no longer be a mystery. the Valley of the Kings, the sacred burial ground of ancient Egypt's pharaohs. For centuries, archaeologists have explored these tombs. But each one they entered was stripped bare by grave robbers in search of gold. Every tomb, except one. On November 26, 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter broke into that long-forgotten tomb to make the greatest archaeological discovery of all time. He found the breathtaking treasures of Tutankhamun. Ever since, the world has marveled at the royal splendor of this young king's tomb. And the most famous treasure of all is the death mask.
Tutankhamun's mask is an icon. And I think part of it is because it is made of solid gold, and a lot of people get wowed by that, as well as by the beauty of the craftsmanship and also by the elegance and the expression of the face.
Crafted from 22 pounds of gold, this priceless object is known throughout the world. But speculation has always swirled around this 3,000-year-old treasure, with some experts claiming the mask may never have been made for Tutankhamun. Now, the opening of a major new museum offers Egyptologists a unique opportunity to assess everything from the tomb as never before. And the world-famous death mask has undergone the most intensive forensic examination ever. It will answer once and for all if this is the mask of Tutankhamun. The Cairo Museum has been the home of the death mask ever since it was discovered a century ago.
Let's see how to open this.
And to see how the mask was documented when it was first discovered, Egyptologist Chris Naunton is stepping back in time.
Wow.
Hidden in the bowels of the museum is a 100-year-old book that details every single object found in Tutankhamun's tomb. It's Howard Carter's original excavation log.
Wow. This is it. This is the beginning of the record.
Yeah.
And so this is the first thing that he recorded. Shrine outermost. 6064. Can I turn the page?
These pages, barely turned for a century, reveal that over 5,000 objects were taken from the tomb, but only a third have ever been seen in public.
That's the death mask. What does he say? Mask of mummy, beard and necklace.
Yes.
Wow. There it is. The most famous archaeological object from the ancient world. Mask of mummy. 60672.
And now, decades after its discovery, the mask is about to start a new chapter in life. In a high-security operation, the entire contents of Tutankhamun's tomb are heading to a brand new home. 15 years in the making, and at a cost of $1 billion, the massive Grand Egyptian Museum is rising up in the desert outside Cairo. The huge array of items arriving show how much this young pharaoh took to the grave when he died at the age of 19.
Ideally, once you die, you go and live forever, and therefore you need everything that you needed in this life. And if you're a king, you had a lot of stuff. fantastic. This is a scepter, which maybe he would have held, or maybe someone else would have walked before him with.
There's everything from mummified food for the afterlife
Nice.
to the childhood belongings of the boy who became the head of a powerful empire when he was only 9.
This is some sort of a seat with a footstool. Little bottom of tut.
Yeah.
Aww. Sweet. He needed all of the stuff he used in daily life, but he also needed a lot of religious, magical things that would help him go from this world to the next. So this is why his tomb is just exploding with objects.
The most important of those magical objects was the death mask. This golden portrait, a clear likeness of Tutankhamun, was vital. It was how he would be recognized in the afterlife. As the thousands of burial goods, from the sacred to the mundane, are gathered together in the new museum, there's a chance for new information about all these objects to be uncovered.
Layers and layers and layers of information are coming out, not just because objects are being examined in detail, but also because new technologies can be applied to them.
Scientific advances beyond the wildest dreams of Howard Carter are allowing the contents of the tomb to be forensically examined, some for the first time. And what's become clearer is that Tutankhamun's massive royal burial did not go according to plan.
Perhaps things were not done exactly as they should have been. Perhaps they were done in a hurry.
The origin of some of the most magnificent objects in the tomb is in doubt. And some have now even suggested that the most famous of all the pharaoh's treasures, his death mask, may not have originally belonged to him.
Was the mask created for Tutankhamun or for someone else?
Could it be true that this iconic death mask was never intended for Tutankhamun? It's inlaid with thousands of fragments of colored glass and semi-precious stones. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan fills the eyebrows. Red carnelian from India sets off the garland. And the eyes are formed from Turkish obsidian. According to ancient Egyptian burial law, this whole mask had to be ready in a startlingly short amount of time. Little more than 2 months was allowed from the moment of death until a body was sealed in its tomb. And that has raised doubts about the mask.
The priesthood and the craftsmen who were involved in preparing the burial equipment would only have had 70 days, and that's the length of time it takes to prepare the body for burial, in which to create material like this death mask. And some people would say that 70 days is not long enough to create an object as fine as this, in which case the only way it could have ended up among the burial equipment of Tutankhamun was if it was already available, perhaps having been made for somebody else.
Over recent years, speculation has mounted that the death mask originally belonged to Tutankhamun's stepmother, Nefertiti. People have wondered if craftsmen short of time could have rescued her mask and replaced her face with that of Tutankhamun. At the new Grand Egyptian Museum, the sheer number of objects arriving in its storerooms seems to add weight to this theory. It was a huge task for the ancient Egyptians to prepare a king's tomb.
Just incredible to think that these things are so old, they're so fragile. I mean, the detail on this is absolutely exquisite. If you look at the open work in this model shrine with the detail of a bull, it's intimidating to be this close to it almost.
The volumes are staggering. hundreds of arrows, beds, sticks, even shoes.
These are
the
beautiful. Yeah.
smallest we have.
So these must have been sandals made for Tutankhamun when he was
Yes.
a young child.
Yes.
How many sandals do we have all together? How many pairs do you know?
All we received until now is about 30.
30 pairs already here,
yes.
and there's still more
Still
coming.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Many of these objects have never come out of storage, they've never seen the light of day. And it's only now, therefore, that we can really get a sense of the full extent of the treasures that Tutankhamun was buried with. And it's really incredible to think. I mean, every single one of these items is an exquisite work of art in its own right.
And all of these thousands of objects had to be either found or created from scratch in just 2 months before being transported to the tomb. Tutankhamun's burial site lies 400 miles south of Cairo's Grand Egyptian Museum, in the Valley of the Kings. Chris Naunton has come to these desert hills to see where all the treasures from Tutankhamun's tomb were first gathered over 3,000 years ago. They lay here until the archaeologist Howard Carter first discovered the long hidden entrance to the young pharaoh's tomb.
Even though I must have been here dozens of times now, it's still a thrill to come down that descending passageway every time. And it's difficult not to try to imagine what it must have been like for Howard Carter coming into this tomb, finding it absolutely chock full of this incredible assemblage of material of the finest quality, more or less exactly as it had been left 3,000 years ago.
The tomb was so full, it took Carter and his team 10 years to remove the massive treasures and haul them across the desert back to Cairo. But as the excavation progressed, Carter was hampered by the size of the site. The burial chamber was so cramped, the team could barely fit around the gilded shrines. It was soon clear this was an unusual tomb for such a powerful ruler of ancient Egypt.
Got to escape the feeling that all is not quite right here. It's just not very big and it's just not very complicated. The design is really quite simple. There's not very much wall space at all. And what there is only half decorated. It feels more here as though a space has been hastily adapted to receive the burial of a pharaoh.
The fact that Tutankhamun's tomb is so small and badly prepared has long puzzled Egyptologists. And at the Grand Egyptian Museum, there's evidence that Tutankhamun's burial fell short in other ways. The latest shipment of objects from the tomb has arrived. It's a batch of shabtis, models of servants intended to serve the pharaoh after death. There were more than 400 of these small figures, many of which have never been displayed before. Each one should look like Tutankhamun, bearing the same face as his death mask.
It's funny with the googly eyes.
But they've raised questions for Egyptologist Salima Ikram.
The idea is that these should all look like Tutankhamun, but you can clearly see a lot of variety here. So although the paint job's similar, the faces are very different because that one's got a pointy nose and that one's got a differently shaped mouth. Some faces are more delicately formed and slightly more feminine even than his. Others are a bit more robust. So there is a question as to whether some of them might have been made for someone else.
It seems the leader of an ancient empire may have been buried with objects never intended for him.
You do see reuse in tomb material fairly frequently, especially in the non-royal corpus. But it seems a bit odd to do this in a royal burial.
The conservators at the Grand Egyptian Museum are now trying to establish how much of Tutankhamun's burial treasure originally belonged to someone else. Existing estimates are staggering. Over 1,000 items, a quarter of the contents of the tomb, are secondhand.
At this point, it's very difficult to be precise about how many items might have been made for someone else, and he used, because it's only now that we are looking even more closely at these artifacts, and so we are slowly coming into the process of saying, well, this might belong to someone else, and it clearly belongs to someone else. So we really have to look at each object individually and very carefully.
It seems the tomb workers, pressed for time, reused items to boost Tutankhamun's store of treasures for the afterlife. That backs up evidence already gathered of what seems like a botched burial. Away from Cairo, at the Griffith Institute in Oxford, England, there are more clues that shortcuts were taken in putting together Tutankhamun's tomb. Chris Naunton has come to study the original notes Howard Carter made as he first assessed the king's burial chamber.
It's absolutely incredible drawing, which was made by Carter himself, is a kind of a plan view of the assemblage of shrines, sarcophagus, and coffins that were found in the burial chamber in the tomb.
Carter carefully noted how Tutankhamun's body, bearing his death mask, was interred in 3 coffins, placed one inside the other, like Russian dolls. The coffins were then encased in a stone sarcophagus inside a set of gilded shrines. In theory, they should have fit perfectly inside one another, but Carter found otherwise.
When he had removed the coffins from inside the sarcophagus, he began to notice that something wasn't quite right. And as he says here, the top edge of the feet of the lid had been chipped away in places, they being too high to allow the lid of the sarcophagus to be placed on the sarcophagus. It seems the coffin was too big for the sarcophagus and it wasn't possible to place the lid down. Carter was beginning to record these anomalies and to recognize that there was something a little bit strange about the way this had been put together.
Tutankhamun, the head of a powerful empire, was given an undersized sarcophagus that couldn't hold his outer coffin. And the middle coffin raises more questions. Discrepancies on the coffin's nameplate, or cartouche, have intrigued Egyptologist Aidan Dodson. He suggests Tutankhamun wasn't just surrounded by second-hand possessions, he was even buried in someone else's coffin.
First of all, the middle coffin is heavily inlaid in glass, completely unlike the other two, which are basically a pure gold appearance. Second, there's some of the inscriptions have the cartouche of the king, which is sunk a little bit too deep into the surface than one would have expected. It looks like the original cartouche has been cut out and a new one inserted. And the final thing is the face, which is not the face of Tutankhamun at all. The cheeks are much wider, and it's also the jaw is rather squarer as well. A much more slightly more pugnacious-looking individual.
It seems the second coffin, one of the most important items in the tomb, may have been recycled. It had someone else's face on it. And this isn't a one-off. Even the precious gold bands used to bind Tutankhamun's mummified body show signs of another name. Chris Naunton has a rare opportunity to see if he can identify who before these bands are moved to the new museum.
I've never seen the underside of this band before, but what's really striking straight away as soon as it's been turned over is that there are cartouches on this side which are not present on the other side. It's quite difficult to read in this light, and I'm looking at the inscription side on, but I can see a scarab beetle and 3 plural strokes, and I think next to the scarab beetle there is an Ankh sign, which is a kind of a loop and then a little sort of cross underneath. We sometimes know it as the Key of Life, in which case this is the name Ankheperu Re, which is one of the names used by a pharaoh about whom we know very little, but it's definitely not Tutankhamun.
Yet again, one of Tutankhamun's most personal burial goods is taken from a previous pharaoh. The evidence is coming together. Tutankhamun was interred in an undersized tomb, and many of his other burial goods, now being examined at the Grand Egyptian Museum, were reused. The case for the iconic death mask being recycled is getting stronger. Now, experts are searching for the final proof. Cairo, the home of Tutankhamun's death mask since its discovery. For a century, the mask has been drawing admirers from around the world. But recently, speculation about the true origins of the mask has become increasingly intense.
In the last couple of years, some scholars have begun to suggest that actually this may not belong to him at all, or it may not originally have been made for Tutankhamun. And there are several reasons for thinking this. First of all, the gold that was used to model the face, and we're sure this is the face of Tutankhamun, is of a different caliber from the gold that's used in the rest of the mask, as if the face was modeled separately, perhaps at a later time.
The theory that the original face of the mask was cut out and replaced by a portrait of Tutankhamun has gained popularity. And Egyptologists have noticed other signs that could show the mask is secondhand.
The cartouche, which includes the hieroglyphic signs which spell out the name Tutankhamun, seems to have been altered, as if perhaps originally it read a different name, a name that was not that of Tutankhamun.
Queen Nefertiti is thought to be the likely previous owner of the mask. Yet all the theories about the true origins of the mask have remained no more than speculation. Until now. In a recent groundbreaking development, leading conservator Christian Eckman gained the opportunity to study this 3,000-year-old treasure. It was the first time that permission had been granted to examine the mask in such depth.
Being entrusted with such a wonderful job also means a great responsibility. It's a unique chance, to study such an iconic object, and of course, the pressure you have is not the pressure which is put by others on you, but the own pressure. You want to achieve the best results, and it's really a single opportunity in lifetime.
While Christian Eckman's work should definitively settle the origin of the death mask, researchers at the new museum have been digging into some of the other puzzles from the tomb. Even objects specifically made for the pharaoh seem to have problems. Museum director Tarek Taufik has been inspecting one of Tutankhamun's gilded ceremonial beds that has recently arrived at the museum.
When working on it, one has discovered that there are different signs on the bed. These signs have started a vivid discussion between Egyptologists about how these beds were assembled.
It's believed the inscriptions on the base of the cow bed refer to the lion god, which suggests that parts from two different beds were mixed up by workers in the tomb.
They had to deal with the situation that the corridor leading to the tomb of Tutankhamun was quite narrow. So the pieces had to be disassembled and then reassembled inside the tomb. Should the beds have been assembled incorrectly, this would tell us that the people were under time pressure. This might have led to mistakes.
It's further evidence the tomb workers were battling against the clock. But why does Tutankhamun's burial seem so much more hurried than that of other pharaohs? Away from the museum, Chris Naunton wants to see if Tutankhamun's body can provide an answer. The pharaoh's mummy, wearing its golden death mask, was first revealed when Howard Carter opened the inner coffin. It took him 3 years of painstaking excavation to reach this point, and he was shocked at what he found.
No Egyptian should have been mummified like this, let alone an Egyptian pharaoh. It was quite normal for there to be an incision on the torso, which would have allowed the removal of the internal organs, which is a part of the mummification process. But in this case, that incision is much too big and it's in the wrong place as well. And also, most unusually of all, perhaps, the heart, which wasn't one of the organs that should have been removed. It was essential that that remained inside the body. This had been removed in the case of Tutankhamun's mummy. So clearly, this was not a standard mummification.
The labs at the museum are steadily filling with more and more artifacts from ancient Egypt. Yet no other mummy in the collection has been found without a heart. It was seen as the center of intelligence and emotion, and essential to life after death. Without his heart, Tutankhamun would have been sent into eternity, unable to think or feel. Clues to why Tutankhamun was buried without his heart could be resting in the body of the ancient nobleman, Yuya.
He's amazing.
This is why some of us do Egyptology, because, I mean, you actually get to see them and know them in a much more intimate and personal way, and it is extraordinarily moving.
Yuya was the great-grandfather of Tutankhamun, and his perfectly kept mummy is in stark contrast to the young king.
You can see how beautifully he's preserved, and although his skin is darkened by oils and resins, it's nothing like the body of Tutankhamun, which is glooped over with masses of resin and oil. It is a very nice counterpoint in comparison with Tutankhamun. And now, Mr. Momin, maybe we can see how that evisceration cut.
Like most ancient Egyptian bodies, Yuya has a slit at the side of his abdomen.
There we go. That's what we want to see. This is the evisceration cut, and from here, the embalmer would put in his hand and pull out the internal organs. And so this is a normal incision, which is over the left flank. But Tutankhamun had a completely odd incision that went straight from the belly button out in a sort of diagonal, which no one else has. And so then his internal organs were removed, higgledy-piggledy, possibly including the heart.
Tutankhamun's botched mummification has led Egyptologists to speculate where and how he died. If he died suddenly, away from home, it could have taken weeks to bring his body back to the Valley of the Kings.
This could mean that he was mummified somewhere away from the Nile Valley in an unexpected way because he didn't have any experts with him who really knew what they were doing.
Because Tutankhamun died young at age 19, it's likely preparations had not been made for his burial. And that meant there would have been much less time than usual to create his death mask and gather together his thousands of burial goods. The man in charge of where and how the young king was buried was his successor, the Pharaoh Ai. And his tomb in the Valley of the Kings is in sharp contrast to the burial site he chose for Tutankhamun.
One thing that strikes you straight away, in contrast to the tomb of Tutankhamun, is that in all aspects, this tomb is just grander, it's bigger. Those passageways are wider. It makes much more of a sort of a grand spectacle of the sarcophagus in the center here. This feels very much like the burial chamber that would be fit for a pharaoh. It's the right size, the decorative elements are here, the care and attention spent on that decoration by the painters is really obvious. The scene of Pharaoh hunting in the marshes is very striking for its detail and particularly the beautiful way in which the birds are painted.
Tutankhamun's tomb is half the size of Ai's, much smaller than most other royal burial sites in the Valley of the Kings.
It was absolutely standard for pharaohs to begin construction of their tombs more or less as soon as they began their reign. And so for Tutankhamun, he would have had a tomb underway, and he might well have had ideas about what he would have wanted.
Ai's tomb has the grandeur that Tutankhamun would have expected. So why was Tutankhamun's burial site so small and his funeral so lacking in care?
People have suggested that this tomb was originally being prepared for Tutankhamun, but it was usurped by Ai as part of his power grab, if you like, when there was a vacuum and a vacancy on the throne at the end of Tut's reign.
Tutankhamun died without heirs. It seems likely that a high-ranking official, but not a member of the royal family, took his chance to seize power. He may have usurped the dead king's tomb and forced him into an undersized burial site with goods taken from previous pharaohs. Now, new scientific tests can tell us if Ai inflicted one final indignity on Tutankhamun. Did he send the young pharaoh to his grave in a borrowed death mask? The Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The dark halls will soon be emptied of their treasures as the antiquities are transferred to the new Grand Egyptian Museum. And the last piece from Tutankhamun's collection to be moved will be the iconic death mask, one of the most revered objects in the world.
Face to face.
Since 2015, leading conservator Christian Ekman has carried out an intensive investigation of the mask.
Have you seen that? Within the eye, left and right, they have painted tiny veins which make the whole eye so lifelike. It's the attention to details I love so much.
His privileged access is allowing him to piece together exactly how the mask was made before it's moved to the new museum. For the first time, expert analysis can answer the question that's been hanging over the mask for years. Was it made for Tutankhamun or someone else? Ekman started by studying the controversial nameplate, or cartouche.
So we are looking here at the royal cartouche of the mask of Tutankhamun, which is placed near the shoulder on the left side of the mask. And in fact, you see some suspicious or unusual traces, like the line here, this one here, which cannot be interpreted so easily.
It's been suggested these marks show Tutankhamun's name was engraved over the top of another name, that of his stepmother, Queen Nefertiti. But Ekman's research points in a different direction.
One has to understand you cannot create a mask of this size without connecting different gold sheets together to the whole mask itself. And the cartouche is running over two parts of gold sheets which have been connected exactly in this position or joined together. And that is what you see here, one of those seams.
The supposedly reworked cartouche is simply evidence of parts of the mask being joined together. But there's something else that's puzzled some Egyptologists for the last few years. The color of the gold in the face is different from the rest of the mask. One theory that's gained traction is the suggestion that the huge time pressure caused by the young king's sudden death meant the craftsmen had to cut corners. So they inserted a portrait of Tutankhamun into something previously made. As part of his investigation, Christian used a powerful X-ray known as XRF to analyze the content of the gold. He wanted to see if the various parts of the mask came from different sources.
We measured more than 100 dots or points all over the mask. The result was clear. They used many sheets of the same gold composition. That also includes the face. So it looks to me very unlikely that the face could have been changed in antiquity and replaced.
Ekman proved that every part of the mask was made from the same gold. That strongly suggests the entire mask was made at the same time, but using different techniques to give the gold a variety of colors. And Ekman found other evidence that the mask is a one-off original. Clues that came from the stone and glass inlays around the face.
If the face would have been cut out and replaced after the mask has been finished already, it could not have been soldered in again without damaging or even destroying the glass inlays nearby, because they cannot stand such high temperatures. I personally think this mask was for Tutankhamun. It was designed for him and it was used for him.
Ekman's results seem to be definitive and mark the end of years of controversy. Tutankhamun's fabulous death mask was made for him alone in just 70 days. An astonishing feat for ancient Egyptian craftsmen.
It is one of the most beautiful portraits in the world. And from the point of view of a conservator studying technology, it's really impressive to see what they were able to do. I would doubt that someone today could create such a masterpiece, and it's really important to know in such a short time.
Tutankhamun was laid to rest wearing a death mask made for him alone, despite his rushed funeral and less than royal tomb. Now the mask will take center stage at the Grand Egyptian Museum. And a new, imposing mausoleum to the young pharaoh will be created. The mask and the treasures of his tomb will ensure Tutankhamun remains known throughout the world.
It's my privilege to work so closely with these pieces and to feel that we are coming so close to 3,500 years of history. It's like touching Tutankhamun. The touch that will keep it for generations to come.
More than 3,000 years ago, a young pharaoh was hurriedly buried in a small tomb, surrounded by borrowed goods, in the hope that his memory would soon be forgotten. But in a final irony, it was Tutankhamun's humble tomb that allowed the treasures crowned by his golden death mask to lie unnoticed until their discovery thousands of years later.
Cigarette lighter. That face, which we know so well from the tomb of Tut, is here everywhere. Little statues, some T-shirts, some little jars, these silver plates, everywhere you look.
And his golden death mask has made Tutankhamun's face the best known of any person from the ancient world.
Okay, wow. So that's a kind of, yeah, okay, so it's kind of Tutankhamun's death mask on a sort of neoclassical column. That's pretty crazy. Every Egyptian wanted to be remembered. They wanted their name to live on. Maybe it was too much for most of them to ask for their face to be remembered. But in the case of King Tut, this is an overwhelming success. It's very beautifully done. Tutankhamun would be pleased about this. Yeah. He'll be very pleased about this one. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Very good doing business with you. Thank you. You have a beautiful shop.
Yes, thank you.
The treasures of his tomb catapulted the young pharaoh into more fame than he could have ever imagined. Tutankhamun may have been buried to be forgotten, but instead, his memory is destined to live forever.